departure and first days on the ocean. They met on the low-tide beach at first light, the exposed sand still wet and gleaming as the sun broke over the eastern hills. The boys came quiet through the morning shadows with their packs and weapons. The dogs ranged around them, Bud staying closest to Damien as always, Sage moving nervously at the edges. The bitch carrying herself with the heavy authority of the pack's matriarch, Rabbit, the stolen courser, dancing at the periphery, Cygnus keeping close to George, and Muley padding silent at Ewan's heel. Bones arrived last, flask in hand, maintaining that careful balance. They stood in the growing light and waited. A rowboat emerged from around the rocky point, 2 men pulling oars with practiced strokes. They beached the boat and stepped out, eyeing the gathering with the wariness of people who'd done this before and knew all the ways it could go wrong. Then they saw the dogs. 6 of them, including the bitch, who stood higher than Damien's waist and watched the men with eyes that had seen violence and were ready for more. "No," the first man said flatly. "Absolutely not. We're not taking dogs." "We need to get to the boat," Bones said calmly. "The dogs come with us." "Look at the size of that one," the second man gestured at the bitch. "Look at all of them. The rowboat's not built for this." "The dogs come," Ego said. His hand rested on his axe. Not threatening, just there, just visible in the early light. The first man took a step back. We can't." "Whale didn't say anything about dogs." "Whale will deal with the dogs," Bones said. His voice had gone cold and certain, the voice of someone who'd negotiated in worse circumstances with worse men. "What you need to worry about is whether you want to explain to Whale why you left his cargo on the beach, whether he'll take that news well." The men looked at each other. At the boys, at the dogs who watched them with the patience of predators who knew their prey couldn't escape. "They come," the first man said finally. "But if that boat tips because of them, it's on your heads." They loaded the rowboat, boys and dogs and gear, cramming into a space meant for half as many. The bitch had to be coaxed in, didn't like the moving platform beneath her paws. But Damien stayed close, kept his hand on her massive head, murmured things that seemed to calm her. The men rowed them out into deeper water toward a shape that slowly resolved into Whale's sloop, a 32-foot vessel that had been a fishing boat before it became a smuggler's tool. They climbed aboard in the strengthening light. The dogs scrambled up with varying degrees of grace, Rabbit leaping like she was born for boats, the bitch requiring encouragement and several attempts, the others finding their way through stubbornness. Whale was waiting on deck, arms crossed. He took one look at the 6 dogs and sighed the sigh of a man who'd expected trouble and found it anyway. "Of course you brought the dogs." "They're family," Damien said simply. "Of course they are." Whale rubbed his face. 6 dogs on a 32-foot boat for 6 days. "Why would I expect anything else?" He looked at his 2 deckhands, who were already shaking their heads. "Well, don't just stand there complaining with your faces, find spaces for them, tie them down if you have to, but make it work." The deckhands grumbled. "Captain, we didn't agree to this." "Nothing's ever what we agree to," Whale said tiredly. "That's the nature of this work. Now secure the dogs and let's get moving before someone sees us sitting here having a philosophical discussion about cargo." The first day on the water felt like freedom. That was the lie the morning told them. The sun bright on the waves, the wind filling the sails with a clean snap, the shore sliding past at a pace that felt like real distance from everything they were running from. Captain Whale handled the tiller with practiced ease, and the 32-foot sloop cut through the water with the confidence of a vessel built for this work. But the dogs were miserable, and the crew was unhappy. And by noon everyone knew this would be a long 6 days. Sage especially hated the moving deck beneath his paws. He moved restless and anxious, unable to settle, whining his displeasure. The bitch settled near the stern, massive and unmovable, watching everything with the patient wariness of a mother protecting her pack. The other dogs arranged themselves in the spaces between. Bud close to Damien, Cygnus finding a spot near the bow, Rabbit and Muley trying to stay out of the way of the working crew. The deckhands complained constantly. Dogs in the way, dogs underfoot. Dogs taking up space meant for cargo and crew. On and on, a steady stream of grumbling that wore on everyone's nerves. "Should have charged extra for the dogs," one deckhand muttered. By afternoon of the first day, they'd learned this was going to be harder than anyone expected. "She's not built for this," Whale said, the fourth time he had to adjust their heading to compensate for a contrary current. 32 feet is fine for coastal fishing, for hauling nets in calm water, but 6 days, with this much weight? He glanced at the four boys, the massive dogs, Bones, and his collection of mysterious bottles. "We're pushing her past what she was meant to do." "Can she make it?" Ego asked, one hand on the rail to steady himself. The constant motion of the deck was harder to adjust to than he'd expected. "If the weather holds. If nothing breaks. If we're careful and lucky." Whale's jaw was tight. If. That's what this whole voyage is. One long string of ifs. "They'll adjust," Bones said, though he didn't sound convinced. He was maintaining, taking small drinks from his flask at regular intervals, keeping himself at that careful balance between sober and drunk. "Everything adjusts, given time." "We don't have time," George observed. He stood at the stern, watching their wake and the coastline they were following. Mudshore had vanished behind them hours ago, but he kept looking back anyway. Looking for sails, for pursuit, for the watcher in fisherman's clothes, who might not have been just a fisherman. For Krasik, though he wouldn't say the name aloud. Ewan sat with his hand pressed against the hull, feeling the vibration of water moving past wood. The wise woman's debt sat in his chest like a stone, patient and permanent. He tried not to think about when she might call, what she might demand, how much it would cost him. Tried and failed. "First night we anchor in a cove," Whale announced as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Can't risk sailing after dark. Not with the rocks along this coast. Not in a boat this small, with this many people who don't know what they're doing." "We're fast learners," Ego offered. "You're also landlubbers who've never spent a night on water," Whale countered. "We do this careful, or we don't do it at all." He found them a cove as promised. A small indent in the coastline, protected from the wind, deep enough for anchorage, but shallow enough to see bottom. They dropped anchor as the light turned gold and red, and the sloop swung gently on its line. "No fire," Whale said when Damien started to set up their cookpot. "Smoke can be seen for miles on water. We eat cold and we stay dark." So they ate dried fish and hard bread in the gathering darkness, while the boat rocked them like children and the dogs whined their misery. Sage finally settled, but only to press himself against Damien's leg and refuse to let go. "Tell me about Banic," Ewan said finally, needing something to think about besides the debt he owed. "Tell me what we're sailing toward." Whale was quiet for a long moment, staring at water that reflected the first stars. "You've never seen a real city, have you? Any of you?" "Crowning was the biggest place we'd been, and Mudshore, I guess," George admitted. "Before that, just Blackdown and the monastery." "Mudshore's not a city, it's barely a town. I have heard of Crowning. It's not much bigger." Whale's voice carried something like awe, something like fear. "Banic it's like nothing you can imagine. Buildings so tall they block the sun. Streets stacked on top of streets. More people in one ring than in all of Mudshore and Crowning put together. And there are 4 great rings, then the sprawl and shanty town. Layers of humanity, all pressing in on itself, all fighting for space and coin and survival." "The watch," George prompted, thinking of Dan, of whether his friend had made it there, whether he joined or perhaps turned back home. "The ring watchers are everything in Banic," Whale said. "They're not like town guards or peacekeepers, they're absolute. They have complete power to do as they see fit. Judge, jury, executioner if they choose, and they're tiered, just like the city. The higher the ring, the more authority. Cross the wrong watchman and you disappear. Simple as that." "Sounds like a nightmare," Ego muttered. "It is, but it's also opportunity. Because in a city that big, with that much chaos, with that many people all trying to survive, you can disappear for good reasons too. You can become someone new. Start over. No one cares where you came from as long as you can pay your way and stay out of trouble." "The Forgotten Wharf," Bones said, speaking for the first time in hours. "Tell them about where we're going. I have never heard of it." Whale's expression shifted, became uneasy. "The wharf is old. From before Banic was Banic, when it was just mining settlements and shipping docks. There was a mine there, played out decades ago. The wharf was how they shipped ore. back when the seam was rich. Why is it forgotten? Ewan asked. Because it's impossible to reach unless you know the way. Shoals and unmarked rocks for miles around. The water's treacherous, currents that shift with the tide, hidden reefs that'll tear the bottom out of any boat that doesn't know exactly where to sail. Ships stopped using it 50 years ago, started using the main harbour closer to the city proper. But smugglers still use it, George guessed. Smugglers, runners, people who need to move things without the watch knowing. People like us. Whale looked at them each in turn. It's dangerous. We lose light, hit a rock wrong, spring a leak, we sink. Die. Simple as that. But if we make it, we land somewhere the watch doesn't watch. Somewhere we can slip into the city proper, without papers, without questions, without anyone knowing we exist. How do you know the way? Ego asked. Because I've done it before. Whale's voice was flat. Years ago, when I was younger and stupider, when I thought running contraband was a path to easy money. He laughed without humour. Lost half my crew on that run, not to the watch, to the rocks, to the water. The forgotten wharf earned its name in blood. They sat with that knowledge while the boat creaked and the water lapped against the hull, and somewhere in the darkness, something large moved through the deep. 6 days, Whale continued, if the weather holds. We follow the coast, stay close to shore, watch for patrol boats. Royal ships sometimes sweep this area, looking for smugglers, pirates, people exactly like us. We see sails, we run for the shallows where they can't follow. Hide in coves, wait them out. And if we can't hide, Damien asked quietly, then we fight or we surrender, and I don't recommend surrendering. Whale touched his belt, where a knife hung in a worn sheath. 4 boys travelling with a wanted drunk and a man smuggling them toward Banic. They'd hang us, maybe torture us first to find out what we know, who we're working with. The watch doesn't play fair. Neither do we, Ego said, touching the axe that never left his side. No, Bones agreed, taking another maintenance drink. Neither do we. Day 2 brought the first real complication. The wind died around mid-morning, leaving them becalmed in water smooth as glass. The sails hung limp. The boat sat motionless on the perfect mirror of the sea. We row, Whale announced, or we sit here until wind returns. The sloop had oars, short, awkward things meant for maneuvering in harbour, not for serious rowing. Whale and his 2 deckhands took positions while the boys managed the dogs and kept watch for patrols. Bones sat in the stern, maintaining his careful drunk, occasionally offering unhelpful observations about their technique. They rowed for 6 hours straight. It was brutal work. The sun beat down on water that reflected heat like a mirror. Sweat soaked their clothes, blisters formed on their hands, broke, bled, formed again. The boat moved forward with agonizing slowness. Maybe a mile an hour when they pushed hard, less when exhaustion slowed their strokes. How far did we come? Ego asked when Whale finally called a rest. Maybe 6 miles, 7 if I'm being generous. Whale's hands were bleeding too, though he seemed not to notice. At this pace, we'll be 3 weeks getting to the wharf. Maybe more. Can't we just wait for wind? Ewan asked. Could be hours, could be days, and every hour we sit here is an hour someone might spot us. Might wonder why a fishing boat is this far from its home port. Might decide to investigate. Whale looked at the flat water with something like hatred. We row until wind returns or until we reach the next cove. Whichever comes first. They rowed until sunset, covering maybe 12 miles total. Whale found them a cove barely large enough for the boat, and they collapsed onto the deck like dead men. I can't feel my hands, Ego said, staring at his bloody palms. You will tomorrow, Bones promised. That's when the real pain starts. He produced bandages from his bag, clean linen that he'd somehow kept dry and ready. Let me wrap those before infection sets in. He worked with the focused efficiency of someone who'd patched worse things on worse men. His hands were steady despite the drinking, or maybe because of it. The maintenance keeping him at that perfect balance where his demons were quiet but his skills remained sharp. Why do you do it? Ewan asked while Bones wrapped his hands. The drinking, the maintaining. You could just stop. Could I? Bones's smile was bitter. You think I haven't tried. You think I don't know what it's costing me." He finished the bandage with a practiced knot. "Some debts you pay forever, boy. Some mistakes you carry until they bury you. The drinking is just how I manage the weight." "The wise woman said," Ewan started. "The wise woman doesn't know everything." Bones cut him off. "She might know of things we cannot see, but she doesn't know what it's like to utterly fail when failure costs lives, to make the wrong choice and watch people die because of it." He took a long drink. "You'll understand someday, when your debt comes due, when she calls and you have to answer." Ewan touched the space just under his heart where Star Scar marked him. "Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you careful," Bones said, reading his face, moving to wrap the next set of hands. "Just don't let it paralyze you. When the moment comes, you act. You do what needs doing. You live with the consequences after, but in the moment, you act." That night, lying on the deck under stars that seemed close enough to touch, George thought about Dan, about whether his friend had reached Banic, about whether the watch would change him, turn him from friend to enemy, from ally to threat, about whether they'd recognize each other if they met in those tiered streets, or whether months and miles and everything they'd done would make them strangers. "You're thinking too loud," Damien said quietly from beside him, "thinking about what's waiting, about who might be waiting." "The watch. Maybe, or maybe just the consequences of everything we've done, everyone we've killed, every debt we've taken on." George shifted on the hard deck. "We're not who we were when we left Blackdown." "Were we ever who we were in Blackdown?" Damien asked. "Or were we just playing at being those people, pretending we fit into that tiny town?" George had no answer for that. Bud whined softly and pressed closer to Damien, seeking comfort that the boy tried to provide despite his own uncertainty. The other dogs slept in their protective circle, instinct holding them together even in dreams.